All right, guys, so today we are finally kind of getting into some of this iPhone cinematic mode thoughts, I guess. And a lot of this was actually for me because myself, just like probably a lot of you fine folks out there, have been wondering if the cinematic mode is something that is worth spending the money to upgrade from like from an iPhone 12 or iPhone 11 or older. Now, just to say it right out there, if you have the money, and because that's an important part that a lot of people totally forget. If you have the money, don't go into debt to get an iPhone 13. But if you have the money and the camera is really important, and especially if you're coming from like a 10 series or older, camera, even without the camera, it's going to be a great upgrade without question. If you're coming from an 11 or 12, then it kind of gets more into, are those features of the phone actually something that is worth the investment? And that's only something that you can actually answer, because even for me that does this stuff for a living, YouTube stuff, I've been really seriously pondering, and I've been going back and forth all the time because it's a cool feature. The phone is nicer than the 12, but is it $1,000 nicer than the 12? That's my biggest concern. So we're going to start off this video really quick here. And I went out and shot with my wife a whole bunch of footage. It's 3 minutes long. There'll be some timestamps below, so if you guys want to watch a little bit and then pop forward to where we talk about it, you're more than welcome. If not, have a watch. Cinematic mode on the left, non-cinematic mode on the right, and let's delve into this, shall we? Okay, okie dokie. So I have both of these clips up here right now, and you can see it's not even a fair fight. It's quite obvious which of the two, left versus right, is cinematic mode, even if I wasn't here telling you. And if you were to ask me this question, because this was all shot and sort of half put together a couple of days ago, and I kind of wanted to come in here and kind of redo it because iMovie for iOS actually came out, and I put a video up just the other day in regards to it, and it makes the editing phase a lot nicer. So being able to play with your footage and get a kind of a baseline edit inside iMovie where you don't have to deal with one clip at a time, kind of changes the game a little bit. Definitely makes it nicer. So you can kind of finesse those clips a bit better. And if you haven't watched that, please, I'll put a link to it somewhere. But out of the camera, out of the iPhone 13, when cinematic mode is on, it really does want to show itself. So it almost always puts itself somewhere around f2, f2.8, somewhere in that range to kind of show itself off. And you can see it like in a clip like this. There's a big difference, and there's a big blur right here. Now, is that a natural looking blur? So-so. It's not bad, but you can see up in here really where it's soft, right? It's really soft in here. It's really soft down the edge here. And even when it's moving, right, you can see it here. Even in her hair, you can really see the lack of detail where it's cutting this out. And even in the words down here, down the side of her hoodie, it's cutting. Now the other, just as a side note, the other bonus of the iPhone 13, especially the Pro models, is that bigger sensor just in general. And because of that, even in the non-cinematic mode, we are starting to get a little bit of blur in here, which is actually kind of nice for a smartphone. It's nothing to this extreme. But one of the things to be aware of is that you can now play. You could play in the Photos app before, but now you can play a bit more to kind of really play around with how much depth of field. And again, I would be really like pushing this much higher, at least 5.6, 6.3, or even higher, depending on what you're shooting, depending on that amount of detail, how close you are to the subject, to make it look a little bit more natural. So this, you can, it's seeable for sure. If we scroll forward here, on a wide shot, cinematic mode or not, almost impossible to see it. It really doesn't see anything in there. There's a few shots with surfers that you could see it. And even this shot here, which is fairly wide, this has a much nicer blur. This is cut out decently. But I think this was one that I actually upped to about f6 to kind of get all that definition back, which you can see here, this actually plays quite nicely in here. Not bad. We are losing a little bit of detail in her hair, her glasses, and her nose, and again in the shoulder versus here. We could again play around with this to bring it back, because I think that's one of the biggest, and I want to say, misconceptions that a lot of, especially people that don't work with or play around a lot with like mirrorless cameras and SLR cameras, we're always like, oh, bring the blur out, it's got to be crazy blurry. And you saw that when the iPhone originally announced portrait mode for photos, everybody's backgrounds were over the top blurry. So you want to really, widen it out a bit more, because most of us, even with mirrorless cameras, don't have our backgrounds that blurry, because the background is also a really important part of the shot. Because yes, we want to draw attention to, let's say, Mary here, the subject, but the reason we're shooting this is because we want to show the location, and this location doesn't necessarily need to be really blurry because we need to be able to see it. So that's really big too. If you're like a holiday person, like going on, like traveling and taking your phone like that for heading out and doing whatever, you know, background is just as, for a lot of us, is just as important. So playing around in here too, we can see here, this is a good shot where it actually, you can see even on a wide shot here of the water, you can see in the lower part here where it is adding that depth, where that, like the LiDAR scanner is playing around to get this. And I actually don't mind it here. You get a kind of a cool strip down there where it looks pretty cool. Here, unnoticeable. But again, here, look at Mary again. If we come in here, the hair here is, we're losing it. We're losing a little bit in her hoodie. Her glasses are going away. Is it noticeable when it's playing? Noticeable enough. And even here, right, you may not even notice that there was hair there. But if you come over on this side, definitely there is. So you have to kind of play around a little bit and figure out, do you like that crispness or do you not? And again, if you go to that iMovie little video that I made, it kind of shows you how you can play around with those to kind of figure out how much or how little of that depth that you need, which I like because you want to be able to play with it. So here again, she actually gets cut out quite nicely, so I don't mind this. I would probably have a little less blur, but that doesn't look too bad. And as she walks into it, the background kind of comes back. We are seeing, right, a bit of the cutoff here. And again, I believe it has to do, and I talked about this with the iMovie video a bit, I believe it's because it's looking for contrast. Because this is white, we're getting that really harsh light on it. It thinks this is the edge, not this is the edge, right? So we may need to really, again, play with that depth to get that to kind of pop out again. Big deal? Not really. A few other ones here. Even in here, we can see this is nice and sharp. We're having a bit of an issue with the cutout on his head right there. Not too big of a deal. My camera's having all kinds of issues, but if you look at the iMovie tutorial that we did, we can bring a lot of this back. Gives us not near as much blur, but a little bit. Gives us a little bit, which is okay. And where's this shot here? You can definitely see that it's having issues even there. Right, cutting that out. But I do think if you were to just take this from probably an f2 up to an f4 or f5, you would get that definition around the board would come back again. So really that's what we're looking for. You're gonna try to find where it locks on. Once it's locked on, we have to play with that f-stop to get that to come back. Because it looks good in a lot of instances. It actually does it fairly well. Again, it suffers on this corner, right? But, and even in here, you can see this is the cinematic one with that blur back there. But even this has got some natural blur because the iPhone sensor is getting a little bit bigger, which is kind of nice. But it does track up decently. The other thing that I found too, because a lot of this footage I ran through just a little bit of a stabilizer just to help it, and the non-cinematic versions stabilized way nicer than the cinematic version, and it's because the background is a little more crispy and it has more like solid edges and things like that, so that the algorithm that the stabilizer is using has more information that it can see, I believe, to play with. So sometimes I would run the stabilizer on the non-cinematic and it would stabilize quite nicely. And then I'd run the stabilizer on the cinematic and I was like, no, that's not usable. Can't use that at all. So little things to be aware of. The other thing to be aware of is that you're shooting in 1080. Now, the footage you're seeing is 1080 up-res to 4K. And I honestly, I think it looks actually surprisingly good. Now, I wouldn't go zooming into it that much, and you do sacrifice that from the 4K, but as long as you frame well, it should be good, right? And there's that little shot there of the rack focus as it's moving. And you can kind of see this. We'll just kind of go through it, right? It just kind of pulls to her meal, whereas mine has a much more true, this one here is a true pull. because it does focus. Right there, you got that end result there. Which is nicer? It's really up to you, personal preference. Again, on the wides, really hard to tell. This is kind of nice though on this shot. This stays really edgy, whereas this has a nice blur. I do like it there for sure. And same thing here, we get this nice blur out of the writing, whereas this is actually nice and solid. Personal preference, I actually would choose the blur for sure. It looks a lot nicer. So a lot of things to play with. Here there was actually a person over to the side which it locked onto, as you can see how much blur was there. But even this one, again, it had locked onto the person to the right, and this has a little bit of blur. That bigger sensor in general has actually helped quite a bit. So do I think it's worth it? Yes and no. So if you're someone that wants to be able to blend this footage or your iPhone footage in, I think, with other like mirrorless or DSLR footage that you have, you can definitely tinker around with it enough, I think, to get it to look much closer than it normally would, for sure. So in that aspect, yes, I think it's going to blend in nice. Do I think a lot of people will turn cinematic mode on and never edit it, whatever it sets itself up as, which is usually, like I said, f2 point something, then it's gonna be a mess, because it is more work to get it to look right, because you need to play literally with every piece of footage. You have to go in and edit it. You have to change that f-stop number, the aperture, so that it has a nice clean edge where it's supposed to. So if you want that mirrorless DSLR look and are willing to spend that extra time to be able to get it to look the way you want it so it doesn't look fake, then yeah, totally, it's worth it. I think it's a great upgrade. And for me, I think this may be reason enough for me to be like, yeah, I think I'm going to keep it. If you're not that person and you're like, no, I just like to shoot and go, then I think if you're buying it for cinematic mode, you're going to be a little upset with the results, because it does need to be played with. It does need to be played with. So there you go. Hopefully this was a little bit useful for you folks out there. And for those of you that stuck around to the end, here is a clip. You saw us out shooting at the beach. Here's some footage that I was actually shooting with my mirrorless camera in 4K. I put it together with a little bit of music. Is it the best footage in the world? No, but hopefully it'll give you an idea of what mirrorless footage actually kind of looks like, because, you know, if you look again at this clip over here, that background is so blurry, and even with mirrorless cameras with, you know, decent lenses on them, they don't normally get to that level of blurriness all the time. All right, guys, enjoy the little surf video, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit that little notification bell, and let me know if you want any more videos along this line that we can pop out for you. All right, guys, I'm out.